Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of the Impact Gaming Center podcast. I'm your host for today, Jake, along here with two of my amazing teammates. First, we got Lincoln, straight off the plane from Houston. How are we doing today, Lincoln?
Doing wonderfully and had a great flight.
Awesome. It's great to hear. Safe travels and everything. Perfect. And we got our second teammate with here today, Johnny. What's up, Johnny?
What's up?
So today we're going to be going over a couple things. We're going to be talking about the RC, what did well, what didn't go well, what won, percentages, what decks do we like, what do we not like. We're going to hear a little bit about Lincoln, his personal experiences, talked about how he played, how the event went, the whole 9 yards. But before we get into it, we need to thank the sponsor for today's podcast, Impact Gaming Center. Impact Gaming Center is located just a short 20-minute drive outside of St. Louis City, located in the fabulous Fairview Heights, Illinois. Impact is St. Louis's premier gaming store, having hundreds of singles in Magic, Pokemon, One Piece, Lorcana, and even the upcoming Riftbound. Along with TCG supplies and singles, the shop offers a large selection of Warhammer, board games, and even Legos for all of your hobby needs. Make sure you check out the shop online at impactgamingcenter.gg. If you're also visiting the area looking for something to do, make sure to swing by the shop and check out their huge LAN center where you can play all of your favorite PC games. And finally, if you're a fan of live streaming and paper magic, make sure you check out twitch.tv/impactgamingcenter and Impact Gaming Center on YouTube for some awesome paper magic content. With that out of the way, let's hear about Lincoln. Tell me about the RC. What happened? What'd you play? Let's get into it.
Yeah, so it was a really good time. I think the very first thing to note is Houston is a scary place to drive in, but somehow we made it in and out of the SCG Con safely. It was being held in the fabulous NRG Center, which is in connection to the NRG Stadium there. So it was really nice. There were a lot of people, but really there was a whole bunch to just kind of take in about this RC. There were, I believe, 1,045 players, which was just fantastic. And I don't know if any of you guys have ever been to a MagicCon, but these SCG cons are just kind of like mini Magicons, with one really major difference, which is the RC is going on. So almost everyone who is there are a really high caliber of player. There are some people who showed up looking to grind LCQs or looking to just enjoy the con. But for the most part, the people who traveled in have already qualified through an RCQ. So it just really brings up the average skill in the room, and it makes it a really great place to learn new things. But all in all, it was a really great tournament. I didn't make day two. I ended up going 4-4. I got knocked out in the eighth round, but I still learned a lot and was really happy with my overall performance.
Awesome. I mean, love to hear it. Love to hear that you had a good time. And honestly, I think that's the most important thing is you went, you had fun. We all love to hear that.
Absolutely.
Before we get into your personal takes, let's talk about the tournament as a whole. Uh, Johnny, give us a quick rundown. What won and did well?
Well, it looks like Jeskai Blink was the winner, from what I see. And then like looking at the top 32, we're just kind of basing it off that for now. The Jeskai Blink deck had a pretty solid showing. Boros Energy had 5 copies in the top 32. Aim the Titan had 4. Prowess had 4. Affinity had 4. Gorios had 1. Brood and Azorius Control and Eldrazi Ramp had 2, and then Esper Blink had 1. 1 Simic Ritual, which I thought was pretty neat. One Domain and 1 Belcher. So that broke down 32, which to quite honestly, kind of what I was telling everybody is this is exactly kind of what I was expecting. I thought this was going to be the breakout weekend for fair decks that was going to flood the market. And that's why I thought, maybe the Titans seemed like to be really well positioned because it just doesn't care about what they're doing. So I think my theories were kind of coming to play a lot here. It looked like Belcher got hated out pretty hard, which that was expected. And I also, one other thing too, I think a trap that people kind of fall into sometimes is to talk about a little bit is the Pro Tour trap. Because, technically Char Belcher won the Pro Tour, right? So everybody thinks,
Mhm.
Belcher won the Pro Tour. But if you really break down the science of it a little bit more, Belcher's win rate that weekend was not that great. And also, I think sometimes people forget that like limited is a huge part of the Pro Tour, right? So like sometimes you can take some losses on the chin in modern if you're an expert at limited, right? And I think sometimes that also plays into some things. Not to take away that Belcher isn't a good deck or anything. Sometimes like when we looked at the win percentages and it was like below 50%, and that was already having like a large target on its back leading into the Pro Tour. People are over prepared for Belcher, I would say.
Yeah, if I can clarify one thing really quick, the reason we're looking at the top 32 is the top 32 players of the RCQ get invitations to the Pro Tour. So normally we would kind of break down the top eight, but the top 32 is really what represents what I would call the winners of this. So let's be honest, going to the Pro Tour is what we want to do. And then Johnny, to follow on to your point, yeah, you're absolutely right. I'm one of those people who missed. I teched hard into Belcher, and across my 8 rounds, I played Belcher 0 time. And I won't lie, I was not expecting that at all.
And I think it's because we were going off of like a lot of the fair decks that were kind of coming out in the meta were ones that really were attacking Belcher naturally at a pretty good angle, right? So
Mhm.
like I think we had like you're seeing a lot of like the blink decks where like the Azorius blink deck, kind of evolved from I think I what we learned I think from this weekend it was just a flavor of the weekend at the Pro Tour. I think it was just a pretty sweet deck that Gabe Nassif ran, and everybody, like really wanted to kind of give it a shot. And then now we have Just Sky Blink that came in and roared it through the tournament. So if we were to go ahead and look at the win percentages here.
Looks
So
like
base,
Blue Belcher was only a 42% win rate.
Yeah.
yeah, and I again I think there's a lot of variables to that, right? One being I mean you still had 44 copies, which is that wasn't even that many compared to Amulet Titan,
Mhm.
according to this graphic that we received. I mean, I think that even goes to show that people were really they pivoted because I think people were feeling the heat, because Amulet Titan, I kind of called it a couple weeks ago. I'm like, I think that was a great plan to try to hedge on everybody trying to go fair this for that weekend because Amulet is kind of like a really sneaky toolbox deck,
Mhm.
and it just has a lot of different things that I think line up really well. And it's got a pretty sweet combo, or it could just kill you with a Titan. And you got 4 main deck Besejus, which, right now with like Affinity and Belcher and like the ramp decks going around, like you got a lot of game against those decks. And the other one I thought was really interesting that had a showing was Brood Scale. That one kind of wasn't on my radar as much, and I say that because I think if you're gonna play an Urza Saga deck, I think you're just gonna play the best one, which I think is Amulet Titan.
I don't know. There's something I really want to point out on these win rates, which is we've been looking at Boros Energy for a while, and it actually had an amazing showing at the RC. Was the most represented in the top 32, and as well came in second. I don't know. I wanted to bring that up for a second. That there's a lot of pieces that we can look at, and I think that you're absolutely right. Amulet Titan was a great choice into all of the fair decks that we were going to be seeing around. And as far as fair decks go, I mean, ever since the One Ring got banned, Boros Energy is about as fair as it gets.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. I think it's safe to say at this point that Boros Energy is what we term as Boomer Jund.
Yeah.
It's the Jund of the format, right? Like it's always gonna hang around like that 50 percentile of like it might be slightly just a little above 50 or slightly below, but it's really consistent what it does. It just has a plan. It's got reach. It plays powerful spells. It just does the thing, right? Like it's always gonna exist. You always have to have a respect for it. You always have to have a plan. It's really explosive. I don't really know what else to say. It's literally just the Jund of the format, and it's also got tech because it's in red and white. It's got a lot of tech to a lot of good hate pieces. It can play Blood Moon if it wanted to. You could really play Stony Silence if you wanted to. You could play Rest in Peace if you really wanted to, even though it probably counteracts Flage a bit and some of your other synergies. But like you have access to white, which is one of the best sideboard colors.
Agreed.
You
So there's
know,
actually something I want to look at in those lists that came second. They're playing 2 copies of Blood Moon in the main with 1 copy of Blood Moon in the side. And when I first saw that, the only thing I could think of was that's such a great choice. The most represented deck was Amulet Titan. Well, Blood Moon is great into Amulet Titan. And then there was Esper Gorios. Blood Moon is great into these 3 color decks. Then you have your Is It Prowess, your Boros Energy, so obviously not going to do so much into there. Followed by Eldrazi Tron. Yeah, Blood Moon's great into Tron. Esper Blink, another 3 color deck. Is It Affinity where it's not so good? Followed by Mono Blue Belcher where it's great. Jeskai Blink, another 3 color. Eldrazi Ramp where it's great. Mono Green Brood Scale where it's great. Azorius Control, it does decently well there. Not quite as strong because it has focus on basics. But really what I'm getting at is Blood Moon is a card that fits really comfortably in the Boros Energy list. And it seems to be just moon effects seem really strong right now.
if you could do it on turn 2.
Yes, yeah. If you get in with Ragavan, you sure can.
It's also one of those decks where you can really pressure your opponent the first maybe 1 through 3 turns of the game, make them use their mana up and the resources on not dying, and then when they're tapped out, just slam the Blood Moon. They have to untap with almost just all basic mountains.
Right, absolutely. And there's another really big impact there with Blood Moon being an enchantment and as opposed to Harbinger of the Seas, which would be the other big moon effect. Blood Moon obviously as an enchantment doesn't die to dismember, and turning things into mountains instead of islands is just that much more valuable when with what we just read off of. Amulet Titan is the only one that's really fairly impacted across the board by both of those. All the other lists we mentioned already represent blue except Eldrazi Tron, of course. So it kind of makes Blood Moon the strongest moon effect right now. And I think it's so interesting to watch the meta rotate around to that, where Blood Moon's a card that's been around for a long time. And it used to be something that you would have to play around all of the time. And everybody had to be really conscious of Blood Moon. And that fear kind of fell off. And this makes me wonder if it should be coming back or if it's something we should be thinking about again, since it seems to have done so well and have been so highly represented in the top 32.
Yeah, I can get behind that. I think the not being a creature right now is huge, as a lot of the ways to get rid of creatures are through free effects like Solitude and not hitting Blood Moon with Solitude. There's not very many Force of Vigors running around. So being able to just land a Blood Moon and know your opponent may not have the best way of dealing with it seems pretty reliable. But speaking of another red-white deck, we're going to talk about one that also plays in blue. Let's talk about the deck that won the whole tournament itself in
Absolutely.
Jeskai Blink. We've talked a bit amongst a group about where Blink is, what is it doing as a deck, and the different ways you can play Blink. I mean, start off as like an Orzhov deck with Aether Vial, and it's gone through a bunch of transformations. The
Mhm.
most popular one and most recent one, which a lot of people are playing, is ones with Frog. And as time's gone on, Blink has shown itself not to be a great Frog deck. I mean, Frog is a good card, but it doesn't play Frog the best that it can. And I think the Jeskai Blink deck really shows the advantages of not playing Frog. So, Lincoln and John, you guys want to walk us through a little bit about why Jeskai was probably the best Blink version at this tournament?
Absolutely. So I think the biggest thing that makes Jeskai Ephemerate so strong is Teferi Time Raveler. The winning list, played by Vinny Fino, congrats if you're listening. Vinny played 3 copies of Teferi Time Raveler in the main board. I firmly believe Teferi is one of the strongest cards right now. If you can play Teferi, you should be. If you can't, you should think about making it so that you can. It plays so well into so much of what people are trying to do, and it just kind of automatically answers the blink plan. Consigning warp triggers or consigning evoke triggers or ephemerating in response to evoke. It just cripples decks so much that I think being able to play Teferi is one of the biggest things that you can do. So this kind of list specifically is really odd because he's playing one of March of Otherworldly Light, a one of Wrath of the Skies, and a one of Lightning Bolt. And then he's got an additional 2 Wraths in the side. But he definitely spread out the concentration of his spell. Now, to follow on that, he was playing 4 consigned memories, but only 2 ephemerates. That's only 2 ephemerates in a blink list, which I think is really interesting. And so I'll be honest, I actually find that to be an odd choice. But this guy won the RC. I sure didn't. So I don't know. Johnny, can you help me understand that a little bit? Why are we playing 4 consigns instead of 4 ephemerates?
I think a lot of people. Well, I think that why Jeskai took advantage of this is consign is an ephemerate if you think about it with upside. And in fact, I would argue that it's more versatile, interactive ephemerate. Because sometimes ephemerates is dead in your hand. Like there are times where you're like, I can't really ephemerate, or like I'm like ephemerating into nothing, right? Like it's just a dead card. And also, you can do some really like interesting tricks with consign, because sometimes one consign can act as a double ephemerate. Let's just say hypothetically you warp this quantum riddler, and then at your end step with the warp trigger you then want to solitude something, and then you just consign and you save them both, and then now you got a lot going on. You can also consign the Thalia trigger. You can consign a Ragavan Dash trigger. You could just, there's so much, it actually does more for your deck in regards to value and things. I mean, you can also cheat a Flage out faster too, because Ephemerate isn't really going to do anything there. And I think Consign works better for this list. Remember those decks that were playing the Jeskai Null Drifter, like dress down type
Yes.
things?
Yeah.
This is what that deck is doing, but on like I think a more efficient scale, and is more well rounded. Because again, Consign can fights fine. It's a decent card against like the other kind of blink mirrors because it can do some tricks there. It's decent against obviously the colorless decks, and obviously when you're maining 4 of those, like, Belcher's is kind of like cool. Like, this is great, right? Consign's good against Titan, right? It can just stop a trigger, which could, basically halt their combo. Like, I think Consign is better than Ephemerate right now. And this
Hmm,
is a deck that kind of takes, and I say it's better because of like how the flexibility, and there's a lot of cool tricks you can do if you're thinking about those lines. Whereas Ephemerate, only interacts with your board. Consign can interact with anything. It's more versatile.
yeah,
So I think this is one of those. It's a meta deck that I think takes care of that, and I think it capitalized on Teferi being like really really good in the meta right now. That's just kind of where I stand with this. Is I
right.
think that this is a meta deck that takes advantage of a lot of things, and I think Consign is just busted. I think
Yeah,
it's just busted. I don't know what to say. The card is just straight up busted, and people are finding more and more ways to bust consign to memory. I don't think that they will, but the people at Wizards has got to definitely be taking consideration at consign. Like, was this a mistake, or is this card
mhm,
fine? Like,
right.
that's we gotta really kind of. That I think it'll take another year or two for that discussion to really come about, but I think I want to be the first one to say that should be starting to be in people's minds.
For sure. So I do like that thought process. I would argue that if we're going to ban consign, we've got to do something about Eldrazi, right? These lists are just so strong that it kind of had to be printed just to keep those from running away with the game. That
Sure.
being said, I totally hear the idea that consign does better than ephemerate. Where in my head, I think if I play consign instead of ephemerate to keep my quantum riddler around, I just get one fewer ETB trigger. But looking at this list playing Flage, ephemerate doesn't work for that. Sure, you can get another lightning helix off, but it doesn't stop him from dying because of the text that escape has. So that's really interesting. Yeah, I can get behind that. And of course, I think the other thing that I continue to see from these really good Blink players is watching them use consigned to memory offensively. Right? They use Ophelia to blink one of their opponent's scary permanents, and then they consign the trigger when Ophelia tries to return it, which is just a great way to deal with literally anything. I mean, being able to deal with quantum riddlers are important. Overlord of the Baelmerk is important. And when your opponent has one, it can be a bit scary. But if you can just consign the trigger to return it, you kind of turn Ophelia into a removal spell. And I think that's a really strong way to use it. Some
So
other pieces. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
so two cards that I really want to talk about are number one, the March of Otherworldly Light. And I think that's an incredibly unique card to be playing. And I think this also answers a question we talked about earlier with Blood Moon, where March of Otherworldly Light is a incredibly clean, effective answer to enchantment and artifact based permanents in a deck like Jeskai Blink, which all the Blink decks are really, really good at drawing cards. It's one thing that we've seen how well they do is just they churn through the deck. Riddler has proven to be probably the best card draw engine in modern at the moment, which leads me to put into my second point of why is Fable finally now we're starting to reappear and bring up its numbers in decks? Well, the one thing that we also know about the ephemerate lists is they draw a lot of cards, but a lot of your cards are not great all the time. And what Fable was really, really good at is pitching those excess cards in your hand to, feed the flage, get rid of some of those extra lands you might have drawn, which also shows how good March of Otherworldly Light is, which you can just discard your hand and say, I don't care how many cards I'm putting into this. I'm just going to draw them back off Quantum Riddler later. So I think that's two really, really powerful cards that this shell plays to the best of their abilities. We all know how strong Fable is. I mean, that card won how many worlds?
Right.
That card's insane. But I really think Fable, like we're going back to a time where Fable can shine because we haven't seen Fable do a lot for about a year and a half ish.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think Fable has a lot of value to it as just kind of being a must answer threat. Like you said, it lets you dig through the deck to find exactly what you need. And that can be extra valuable when you're, holding two consigns in an ephemerate and you really just need a creature to sink them into. It does just kind of maximize the value you can get out of well, honestly, I think that's what makes this list so good is that it maximizes the value of just about every one of these cards. So I really enjoy that about the way this is put together. I have been seeing March of Otherworldly Light be played in a couple other lists, and I think it's because it's one of the few clean ways to answer some of the land type animated creatures like Hall of Storm Giants. It's a really good way to answer that at instant speed, as well as just it's an easy way to clean up Ragavans and other turn one threats that are getting very popular right now.
What's your take, Johnny?
Well, March is interesting too because it's a nice clean way to deal with Urza Saga, right? For one white, because like
Mhm.
Prismatic Ending can't. And again, I think it goes back to that like that pitch plan. Like when you play Quantum Riddler, you can pitch anything. It doesn't matter. Quantum Riddler will just buy it back because Quantum Riddler lets you put to the, like aggressively play to the board. And then another cool thing about too with Teferi is also just a really good value engine in this deck, right? Like you could blink something and you could fail it. Right? Like you could blink and draw, then fail it back. Like there's a lot of cool, and also Teferi could like rebuy a Fable later on if you need to. Like this deck's got a lot of synergy. I did take it for a test pilot run on a league, and it was a lot of fun. I'm kind of curious to see how this deck's going to evolve because we got Vegas, not too far away, and also just kind of looking how diverse the format is getting right now, right? Like makes you wonder like is there going to be a new iteration of this version for Vegas? Like what's going to be the meta deck? And it's kind of crazy to think about too that like this might be the first time in Modern in a while where you've seen an actual like meta call like this because the format's pretty broad usually, but now it's looking like there's actual metagaming strategies and actually can hate things out more than you could in the past without having so much diversity. There is one deck I do want to talk about, and I think this is really interesting. The Cynic Ritual deck put a copy in. That deck got to the Pro Tour. What do you guys think about that deck?
I'm happy to hear that you're as surprised about that as I am. Listen, I always thought the deck was fun. I think it's cool and all, but I didn't think it was good. I didn't think it was going to do much. And looking at this list, it is very stock. I'm not even sure what to say looking at it. This is exactly. I mean, you've played against this on MTGO before, right? Like I'm not seeing anything out of this that really shocks me. I think the only big change is the harbinger of the seas, and we did already discuss how moon effects are so good right now. But I think it's super cool, and this brings up a conversation that we've all been having for a long time, which is modern is in such a healthy place right now. To be in a place where any deck is good enough to get to the Pro Tour, to perform this well at these high stakes, high turnout events is really awesome. And this is just another one of those lists that I don't expect to do super well. And then what do you know? Any deck can perform, right? Anything can happen. So I think it
Well,
must have been piloted beautifully as well.
if you think about it, it's really interesting, right? Because this is also one of those value decks, right? Where it wants to like try to get as much value as it can, and also you get to play a lot of pitch spells. You're playing a lot of value flares, force negations, subtly endurance. So you're also kind of like emptying your hand, right? Either trying to get to the Oculus to kind of just like finish, or just getting values off Fiddlips, and they've been playing Harbinger in the main for a bit. So that really isn't like a new tech, but I think it's also pretty cute that I can just, oh, by the way, here's a seas that you can't interact with because it's not even on the stack. It just happens, right? If you get it from a
Right.
ritual, which I think kind of gives it a little bit more juice in this one. And also looking at the win rate, which again, like there's only 5 copies, but overall had a 61% win rate. And I understand it's only 5 copies, but maybe this is something to really kind of go in the tank and explore a little bit more on. Like, what does this do differently on attacking the meta and the angles, right?
Mhm.
So looking at its win percentages, so the best decks that it was like it beat was Amulet Titan at 78%, Esper Reanimator at 76%, Eldrazi Ramp at 56%, and then both a 60% against Esperphilia and Belcher. This deck seems to be doing really, really well against combo decks and slower decks.
It makes sense because you kind of just outgrind. You can really outgrind those decks, and then you also get like subtly, which is like one of the best pitch spells against a lot of like, and also like I imagine like you also just you house Neoform, right? Because subtly is just so backbreaking for that deck too, and then subtly can be backbreaking for Amulet, or even for, like there's a lot of matchups where that card just like it's really busted, and then Endurance still good card. It's got a good body on it. It can really like help your aggro matchups as well as take care of the Gorios plan,
Do you
especially
think this
because
is the new do you think this is the new frog deck? Like I think this is just the new Like this takes the spot of where Demir Frog was because it's doing a lot of the same things.
I'm not sure if I'd go that far because I mean Demir Frog was really good about closing the door on the spot when you needed it to, or like because your threats are a lot more powerful, like closing wise, right? Like Kaido and Frog and Murktide are pretty quickly can close the door really fast, right? In my experience playing with this deck, even though you have Oculus, sometimes you don't win that quick. So like sometimes you have to play the value game and try not to gas out. So I wouldn't say it probably attacks those matchups pretty well, but I don't think you close the door as fast as you'd like to.
That's fair.
I think this could be something that should be really considered. I think this was a really interesting list overall. I just think it's important that we just bring it up. It was all I was really getting at. The other list that I think should be interesting to look at, not list, but what about prowess? So
Yeah, prowess showed up in a huge way.
let's talk
And
about that.
yeah, it really showed up in a really huge way. I think it has really good matchups right now. And one of the pieces that people have been sacrificing is a little bit of removal, right? We've seen static prisons and Boros energy go down. We've seen people running their one mana answers like lightning bolt have come down. So I think that when you're slamming these monastery swift spears and their slick shot show offs, it's really vital that you get them off the table. And decks weren't doing that very much right now, especially considering Amulet Titan was the most popular list that weekend. It does give prowess kind of an open field to try and kill on turn 3 with some lava darts and some mutagenic growths.
It feels like to me like when I was piloting some blink against these prowess decks, that sometimes even the solitude like ephemerate hand wasn't good enough.
Mhm.
Like because the velocity of like these prowess decks now are like have so much more reach than they used to. It used to be like two removal spells was good enough. Now it's just like, especially with Corey Steelcutter, and the fact that you can also just like gain some weird tempo, right? By like you could just plot a slick shot and not do anything with it forever, and then you have to kind of respect it, and then you kind of just use other ways to kind of burn out the removal. Like there's so much more play to the deck now, and I think it's such an interesting, and you still get like EI, and you still get some pretty good spells, and I don't know, I think that's another one to see how that will do come Las Vegas. The one other one I think outlier before we move on is Zoo. I don't know how to evaluate Zoo at this point. I think Zoo's just always going to be there. There's just always going to be that one person that wants to bring Zoo. There's always going to be that one Zoo copy.
Yeah.
And like
But
as much
you
as
know, it didn't really seem to perform this weekend.
yeah, like that. So Zoo has always been like a really interesting one, right? Because if we look at the list that made it, they were on the Doorkeeper Thrall version,
Mhm.
and they're playing a one copy of Winter Night Stories, which I think is really interesting. And then why I think, especially because they've got Flage, so I guess that's kind of cool. Like you could just pitch a Flage to it and just draw 3 cards on it, essentially. But like, yeah, like I don't know how to get a real good read on these Zoo decks, and I used to play a lot of Zoo. Like I just, what are your guys' thoughts? Because I cannot, I don't know.
Yeah.
My list is taking a second to pop up, so you go
Yeah,
ahead,
yeah.
Linkard, if you got anything on it.
So I think that Zoo is it's really weird to put to words. I feel like Zoo is one of the most fair decks of all fair decks that's ever played, minus Scion of Draco with Leyline of the Guild Pact. The only big issue that I see is that it's maybe not super consistent. And while that can be a big issue, if you don't do that, then your deck doesn't really perform, right? Without a ley line, you can have a really hard time. You still get blown out by moon effects if you're not really careful. And yeah, these lists I think are just struggling to find a good home because I feel like they will always be good, right? They will always do something, they will always matter, but even so, it's just really strange. It just puts you in a really strange awkward spot to be playing these lists where you don't really do anything super broken, right? You don't Isochron Scepter, Imprint, and Orum's Chant, and all of a sudden the game looks completely different. You don't suddenly combo off and win, or even Boros Energy, you'll find yourself buried in cats before you know it. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
Zoo is just one of those decks that if it does its thing, great. You know, its thing is just big creatures, but if it if something doesn't go right for it, it has a really hard time not just getting buried in the ocean of unfair things happening around it.
I think once you fall behind, I think that's the nail in the coffin. But like I think if you're trying to like outmuscle the other fair decks besides Blink, I think it's actually pretty solid. But it's also losing a lot of its like combo matchup reach, right? Because it's not playing for stubborn denial. It's also the issue I have with the deck a lot, to be honest, is the sideboarding is just so difficult with the deck.
Mhm.
I think that's always been one of the hardest obstacles I've had because I've like want to attack on so many different angles with like what I have access to, and like I'm always just kind of like maybe this is not right, you know. And I don't know, I don't know. One day I will go back to the zoo project and invest my time into it, but for now, I think I just think I'm just gonna leave it in my staples box.
Part of me wonders is if we're just finally in that part of modern where everyone has been leyline signed before and always knows how to kind of play around it and plan around it, and decks are prepared for it. Where and on top of that is some I feel like the doorkeeper throw strategy. A lot of the blink decks are playing a lot more actual removal and not just being completely solitude reliant, which might also be a bit of why it didn't perform as well. Do we have any other final thoughts on the RC? I think Zoo's a pretty good deck to wrap up that on.
I think just the very last thing I really want to mention, looking at the breakdown of decks, Goryo's Reanimator. I don't know how else to say it. It keeps showing up in huge numbers at the Pro Tour and now at the RC, and it is not performing. There was only one copy in the top 32, and it was the second most represented deck, with the next one being almost 3% lower than it, a little more than 3% lower. It it showed up in a big way at the Pro Tour as well, and it just didn't perform. We don't have to spend too long on it, but is this deck maybe not worth the hype? I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but it's hard to see it show up in such high caliber tournaments in so many numbers and just be so underrepresented in the top 8 or top 32 in this case.
I would argue that it's probably one of the most powerful decks at what it does. And what I mean by that is it's probably the most powerful solitude deck. Meaning like because you have solitude, having solitude and being able to use solitude and have the ephemerate line with that buys you so much time against like the amulet titan, right? Because if you just catch the titan, right, or if you catch like some of these like creature combo things, right? Sometimes that buys you just enough time, and you're also just doing some really so like your busted starts are like really busted to where like the fact that like when you combo if you run hot, then you still get like, okay, I have force backup, I have solitude backup, sometimes I have subtly backup. It's one of the most powerful decks I think in the format. And I think that's kind of like why people keep playing it because like you have a lot of ceiling. Am I thinking of ceiling or am I thinking of floor? I always mix those two up.
I think you're thinking of ceiling. Like the ceiling of what this deck does is so high and it does so many things. But I also feel like this deck is probably one of the most disruptible decks where it gets you can stop Gorios on a lot of points on the curve. Where a lot of decks right now are playing answers for frog. You can answer Gorios on the graveyard with endurances and surgicals and Thraben charms, all the stuff like that. And on top of it, then you can also answer it with the ETB triggers from Atraxa by just consigning all the triggers that matter. I think it's the most interactable combo deck where when if you get them and you stop them, sometimes it takes this deck a minute or two, a turn or two to kind of catch back up. Where Amulet Titan, on the other hand, can just wiggle its way out of almost any situation. Amulet Titan's always been really good at that. That's my take on it.
My last point on with that though too is I think I also think it's actually a really difficult deck to play. If I'm being completely honest with you too. You know, I've definitely piloted it and I've definitely had some success with it, but I've also like every time I pick up the deck, I swear I'm learning about a new line every time. Or like there's something like little intricacies that like I'm like I never would have thought of until this moment that I like it's too late to do that moment, but I just thought of it. I think it's one of those kind of decks, honestly, that I kind of feel like maybe people just take the raw power of the deck and think that's enough to get by. From my experiences with piloting the deck, it can really do some very powerful things. But I also think the builds are not optimal. There's some things I kind of miss about the older versions that I think made it more like I think it's wrong when you're not playing Emperor Bones.
I agree with that.
And I see a lot of lists are just not playing Emperor Bones, and I feel like Emperor Bones gives you such a good plan B that I don't think a lot of people are utilizing it. And like I do see that the list that made top 32, it did play one copy and it played one Ulamog, but like I don't see the point of playing Ulamog when you can just play another Emperor Bones. Because also Emperor Bones, people forget that naturally that card is just good on its own because it can interact with the graveyard. Worst case, it just turns into a 4/4 that maybe buys some value, and then it's also an amazing ephemerate target. You
And
know,
also
like
get your opponent's stuff.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. Is sometimes like it's good in the mirror. It's just good. It can sometimes just catch a flage, like eat flages. It also is just a 4/4 body that sometimes is just good enough.
This
I've
list
won
is
a lot.
also playing another one of March of Otherworldly Light. I want to point that out too.
Yeah, that's definitely a thing.
I I
Hmm.
love our discussion on RC. I love hearing about the topics. Really quick, anything else?
Now let's go on to the new stuff.
I want to hear about Lincoln's experience. Tell us a little bit about what happened with you, Lincoln. Give us the rundown.
Yeah, absolutely. So, very first thing, I already said it, but driving in Houston can be scary. Everyone who drives there has clearly got somewhere to be, and that can be a little scary. But otherwise, there was a lot that I learned being there. I think the first most important lesson was Amulet Titan is not locked out by the Teferi Isochron Scepter Orum's Chant combo. Beseiju is not a spell, so they can still channel it and they can do that at instant speed even with its fairy on the table to blow up an isochron scepter. So yikes. I learned that the hard way. Otherwise, just to kind of cover what I was doing there, I brought the Azorius control list, the one with Isochron Scepter, Orum's Chant to Fairy, Narset Days Undoing, that whole package. And the reason I did this instead of Demir Frogtide, which has been the deck that I've been all in on for the longest time, really. Frog is just not in a good place, and I'm sure it will come around eventually, but I needed to find a new deck. So I'd only practiced this particular list. I think I ran one FNM and two leagues with it, and the FNM was the very first time I'd ever piloted the deck. So it was just a really odd experience for me to then take it to a really high caliber tournament like an RC. Even so, I felt really confident in my performance. My first game was against Esper, Reanimator, good old Gorio's Vengeance, and my deck just felt really strong. I was able to do what I wanted to do. I could stop my opponents from doing what they wanted to do, and it didn't I just found the amount of disruption that my list played was the right amount. I didn't need a ton of disruption because I eventually locked them out of playing the game. I just needed to disrupt them that one or two absolutely pivotal moments. My second round was a lot more interesting. I played against Esper Blink and it was super grindy, but I ended up winning I won in 3, but on the third game my deck didn't do anything that it's supposed to do. I got 0 of my planeswalkers, I didn't Days Undoing any amount of time, and I didn't Isochron Scepter any of my spells. I tried. The imprint trigger got consigned, but I absolutely tried to do some of those things, but it never panned out for me. I ended up winning through Solitude Subtlety beats. And it was a really interesting thing for me to see that if you pilot the Azorius control list well, you have a lot of avenues to victory, and you just have to keep looking for them and looking for odd ways to kind of lock your opponent out. Otherwise, I had a tough weekend against Broodscale. I was 2-0 going into a Gruul Brood Scale in the third round, and I felt like I did the best I absolutely could, but I just never quite got there, right? My opponent was able to find the combos, find the line. They baited me really well in the third game, and that was tough to work through. So I definitely identified that this deck needs a bit of work to play well against Broodscale. And in match 5, I did the same thing. I lost to Broodscale and picked up my second loss. But the fourth round, I was against the mirror matchup. I play Field of Ruin in my list. Looking at the other lists, for blue white control that made it to the top 32. They do not seem to be playing Field of Ruin. I do see some on Celestial Colonnade for kind of another manland that's a bit lower to the ground than Hall of Storm Giants. So I really like that. It's also an elemental, so it gets like a hero buff. But I found that Field of Ruin was something I believed strongly in and had a little bit of disagreement, even with some other members of the Impact team, on if it was the right play. And it showed up in a huge way. It was really, really great at turning off Tron, at dealing with Urza's sagas when I didn't have a Wrath of the Skies. And then in this control mirror matchup, it gave me a gigantic edge because these games would get super grindy, but my opponent wasn't able to lock me out with a Gaia Reach. They weren't able to animate their Hall of of storm giants. So there were just a lot of things where I was able to maintain higher value because I was playing some Field of Ruin. I also never found the Field of Ruin to choke me on mana, and that was a really big upside. Otherwise, my seventh round was against Amulet Titan, which is where I learned that hard lesson I mentioned earlier. It was a really good time. My opponent was really skilled, and it was hard to kind of deal with. Right, Amulet Titan just does so many things that aren't casting spells but interacting through their lands that Orm's Chant did not do as much as I really wanted it to do. It's still a good card, but I didn't feel like when I Orm's Chanted somebody, I was just automatically in the clear. So just I definitely need to put some more time and energy into trying to solve that specific matchup. And yeah, my last round was unfortunately into an Eldrazi Tron matchup that I ended up losing. It felt really close, but ultimately I need more consigned memories, right? I need 8 or 9 copies of those, and right now I can only play 4. So my opponent, through some really masterful play and great use of disruptor flutes, were able to really keep my deck from operating. So all in all, I showed up with this deck that I've only been playing for about 2 weeks, and I'm not mad at all about going 4-4. I felt really strong. I felt like my list did what I wanted it to do. And I honestly felt like the games where I lost had a clear path in. I didn't feel like there was anything where I was just truly locked out of the game or where I couldn't perform. And it made me really happy being there. So that's kind of my overall rundown of just how my individual games went.
That's awesome. I'm so glad that you had a great time. Talking about blue white control, do you feel that the Narset Days Undoing package is the best way to be playing that deck currently? Or do you think maybe go into more of a spells and solitude beatdown win condition, or maybe some man lands or something like that is the more correct path?
Yeah, so it's a really great question, but the truth is, I think both are the way to play the list. And I'll be open to being wrong, but the I kind of had to pick whichever line was available at the moment, and I like the way that the list that I was playing doesn't fully commit to any of them. And I just think that's how you have to play Modern right now. It's too easy to get interacted with in a way that shuts off your strategy if you only do one singular thing. By running Gaia Reach with Narset, that's one way to lock people out. Narset plus Days Undoing is another really strong combo that'll just blow a game wide open. Teferi Time Raveler plus Orm's Chant and Isochron Scepter locks people out of the game. Your man lands give you the ability to end the game once you've disrupted them enough. All of those together, I feel like, are the way this deck needs to play. I would love to think about adding a higher density of subtleties and seeing if you could put a little bit more pressure onto the board that your opponent answers. Because one thing about a deck like this is that you have to assemble some form of combo. It doesn't really play like a combo deck, but at some level, you do eventually assemble a combo. And it would be nice to force your opponent to interact a little bit with what you're trying to do on the board to free up a turn where you all of a sudden go, great, Narset Days, scoop them up. Or Isochron, Imprint Orm's Chant, and the game is now really scary. So I don't know if there's a good way to do that yet. Maybe when they print the 1 mana Ragavan and White equivalent and Modern Horizon 7 or whenever that'll be. But for right now, I do think a 2 copy of Days plus 4 Narset is the right way to be operating this list. It was just such a good way to close the door and help find whatever combos I was after.
I like it. Do you keep on playing you white through like your next few big competitive events, or
I
you looking back
actually
to
do.
Frog, or
Yeah, I actually do. So my plan is that until Frog comes back in a big way, I think I'm going to commit to this list. Unless I'm given reason to believe otherwise, I actually think this list is positioned very, very well in the current meta. There are a lot of really strong decks, but I think just looking at the top 32, I actually don't hate how my deck lines up into any of these lists except Prowess. Prowess is the only list that's forcing me to reconsider my strategy a little bit. I have to build in some more fast-paced removal, right? So I'm playing Prismatic Ending, but really what you need to do into these prowess lists is to clean up their creatures in combat after they've committed cards to them, as opposed to cleaning them up at sorcery speed. So Solitude, of course, can do that, but I'd love to be playing some more. Maybe some March of Otherworldly Light by myself. I would love to run some Path to Exiles, even. So those might be ways that I want to adjust my deck to make sure that I can deal with a slightly more aggressive meta that may be picking up. But otherwise, Honestly, Jake, this list is strong. It plays really well, and like I said, I didn't feel like any of my losses were out of reach or like any of my matchups were unmanageable. I just felt really, really confident in how this plays. And I think that if I learn this deck better over the next little while, over the next few weeks, I get better at the deck and get in a lot more reps, and then make the right meta calls for my sideboard, I will be in a really good position come Vegas.
Yeah,
Comes to
John.
my next point.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
So, I was actually gonna ask, because obviously you and I are usually the same similar wheelhouse of, archetypes here we like to play. And before I go to my next point, I did wanna notice something that was kinda hilarious. Grixis Control win rate was 14.3%. I just wanna put that out there that I must be the luckiest Grixis Control player in the world. When I won when I won my RCQ with it, with the Grixis Wizards. But all right, now back to what I'm really getting at. I thought that was funny and we had to just bring it up. So moving forward, what do you think you could have done differently, or what do you think you're going to do differently with this testing for Vegas? And what are some things that were there any like hard lessons learned of like how to prep? Just kind of talk me through your like your process and like what do you think you could do like
I hope you
mentally,
guys have got
physically?
all night because I've got a lot of things that I learned. This was a huge learning experience for me. A lot of people may not know this, but this was actually the first RC I've ever attended. So it was a really big moment for me as a Magic player to get to learn a lot. And I was trying to approach it with a learning mindset. I knew with so many players, while I entered with the high hopes of making top 32, my ultimate goal was just to learn the most I could because I would like to be on the Pro Tour for a long time. And the only way I'm going to be able to do that is if I truly perform at a high level every time I play. And practice makes perfect, right? So I learned a lot. The first really hard lesson is prepare lunch. Or yeah, outside of the game, bring a lunch, have something figured out, right? You make sure you have some hydration and nutrition plan going into that day. On round 7, we were coming up on time, and between the pressure of not wanting to go to turns as a control list and having not eaten anything in many hours, I was literally shaking trying to play. And it was really difficult for me to make good decisions and at a quick pace when I just hadn't eaten in so long. That's just kind of a lesson that I needed to learn about these long all day tournaments. I've got to have a plan to go get food. I've got to have a plan to stay hydrated, right? To make sure I'm getting enough water and to have food in me and make sure that I can keep a clear head all of the time when I'm playing. So yeah, I mean that's a big one for me, right? The
Well,
next
and
thing that I learned, go ahead, go ahead.
you're kind of encountering what I used to encounter where I was like, okay, like what do I need to do to stay fresh? And I think the biggest thing to do is like find a way to eat and just move outside, like breathe air.
Mhm.
I think is
Yeah.
like was like the biggest thing that I would say. And I think the best thing to do, especially because we'll get there, for Vegas, we'll get there Friday. I would maybe just look at what are going to be the quick spots to get food. Try to plan your route of exit because that's going to help a lot.
Yeah. So it's definitely a lesson learned for me and something that I know I'll do better going into Vegas. The next big lesson that I had to learn was just that you have to constantly adjust your list and be prepared for the meta. This was something that I felt like I did really well coming into this RC. I honestly felt that my sideboard was really well prepared for what I would run into. And I did over prepare for Belcher. I'll be the first to admit that. But I really think that so much of what modern players do right now that causes us issues is we will net deck constantly. You kind of see this homogeny form on these different lists in between big events as everyone kind of settles on how they want to be playing Azorius Control or how they want to be playing Boros Energy or what, this, that, or the other. And what ends up happening is you have these lists where everyone is playing the same 75 plus minus 5. And then when you look at the winners of Pro Tours and the winners of RCs, you're seeing these lists that you know and love plus minus 15. And it's a big shakeup. And they're doing something seriously different that's always worth looking at and paying attention to. And this just always stands out to me is make sure that you have good thought put into everything that you're doing. Don't just play the conventional wisdom, right? You be prepared for the meta you're coming into and make sure that you're ready to adapt your list or to play even a slightly different list than what you would be comfortable with. Only other lesson, well, not only other, but one of the big ones is have a plan for prowess. Prowess is really picking up speed and it does play differently than a lot of other decks. One of the big things that this picked up for me personally is when building lists, try and build something resilient. That modern's in such a healthy place that what you'll see is the decks that are the best right now are only the best because of what else is being played. So the next weekend, the best deck will be different. It's just entirely subjective, right? I think that we're on the margins of percentage points for good decks. And you've got to be able to play a list that can survive a tough weekend. So yeah, that's a lot of my thoughts.
I love it. Thank you so much for walking us through that because that's such a great insight for I think anyone going to a big tournament and learning off each other is the only way we're going to learn. So thank you so much for walking us through that. Before we close, let's talk about hey, we just came back from a big event. What are we feeling for F&M this week? What are we going to play? Do we have any decks we want to practice? I imagine Lincoln, you're probably going to bring blue white.
I hate to be that guy, but yeah, I will be bringing blue white. I think I'm gonna, just like I did with Frog, I'll be on this deck for a little while, and I'll just make sure that I'm, a pro at this list.
Johnny, how about you? What are we bringing for F&M?
That's a great question. I think I'm going to. I think I'm going to go in the tank here and see. Maybe I'll actually take out this Simic deck.
I love it.
might-
I've got Mardu Ephemerate, the same list that I 4-0'd a few weeks ago with, sleeved right now. I have had the itch to try Death and Taxes again. And I want to try, I'm calling it Tiller and Taxes with green white taxes with ISO Explorer and just going all in on that. I'm going to blow up all your lands and you don't get any of them. So that's my list for this week. I think it's gonna be fun. I'm really excited. But speaking of F&M, hey, if you guys like Magic and you like watching Magic and paper, make sure you check out twitch.tv/Impact Gaming Center. The shop's great. The shop's amazing. The wonderful folks who sponsor our podcast. So if you liked what you heard today, this was the first episode. Leave some discussion points down in the comments. Tell us what you liked, what you didn't like, what you want to hear about. We have some incredible talent on this team, some incredibly good players. One of the things that our goals for this is, week to week, the voices may change, but the goal is to be an entire team impact. So expect different people. It's not always going to be us three. It might change a little. And then if you want to support the podcast, the best way you can support us is by supporting the shop and checking out all of their products at impactgamingcenter.gg. Johnny, Lincoln, anything else before we close it out?
No, sir, just thank you so much for doing this. I really do appreciate you, and I had so much fun getting to talk to you guys.
Johnny, you got anything?
Yeah, we did it.
Nope. Well, thank you guys so much for listening in. Tune into next week, next time. We don't know the schedule yet, but thank you so much. See you guys.
See ya.